Water. It's essential for all life on our planet. Some are even calling it blue gold. In our previous episodes, we did a deep dive into who is controlling our water and how it's becoming an increasingly scarce resource, and how the bottled water industry has been operating with very little oversight. In this episode, we'll talk about the amazing phenomena of water memory and how this could revolutionize the entire medical field. But is there a sinister plot by the deep state to cover this up and stop it from getting out to the public? All of this and more on today's episode of Edge of Wonder. Wonder.
Welcome to Edge of Wonder. I'm your host, Ben.
And I'm Rob.
Water is one, if not the most important resource on our planet. I mean, without water, we would all die.
This is why some people are now referring to water as blue gold. On our last two episodes, we went in depth on the water crisis, bottled water, and who really owns water.
On this episode, we are going to talk about what water memory is and how water may in fact be one of the most amazing elements that exist on our planet, one in which we all take for granted.
Also, after our series on the deep state, we realized that water plays a part in this sinister plot, just like everything else. But we'll get into this later on in the episode.
So let's dive into it. Jacques Benveniste, who was head of the INSERM's Unit 200 directed at immunology, allergy, and inflammation, was the first person to discover that water has memory.
His work in the 80s was based on the homeopathic medicine concept of dilution increases potency, which made homeopathic medicine more mainstream. The concept is when you dilute medicine, it actually has more of an effect on the body because it activates your own immune system while bringing you less side effects.
Benveniste wasn't really interested in the aspect of water memory at all. It wasn't until he discovered this by accident. He started to experiment, and they took an anti-serum or antibodies to test people's blood for allergies. Homeopathic medicine used water to dilute substances, followed by vigorous shaking of the vials, in which it is believed energizes the water.
So he used 20 vials of water, and each one was diluted by a factor of 10. The second dilution was 100 times weaker, and by the 20th time, it would be the same, which was almost like putting a drop in the ocean. There was nothing left of the serum.
Benveniste then asked for the vials that were the most diluted to be added to the blood samples, in which he thought for sure nothing would happen since, it basically contained nothing of the original anti-serum. If someone was allergic to the serum, the white blood cells, or specifically basophils, would cause them to die or degranulate on contact with an allergen releasing histamine, which is involved in inflammatory response. But in this case, nothing should happen.
However, they found that the amount of cells which were degranulated by the dilution was just the same as in the full-strength allergen.
Benveniste first thought it just wasn't there, so they tested it again and they got the same results. After the next test showed the same results, Benveniste said he was completely flabbergasted and he had no explanation of how this happened.
As are we. That's crazy. So after 2 to 3 years of devoting all of his time to getting to the bottom of what was going on and how this could happen, he said that there was no possibility that any molecule could have possibly survived.
This discovery of memory of water made Benveniste feel he might have stumbled upon one of the greatest scientific discoveries of the 20th century. The media in France were eating this up, but the scientific community remained silent on the matter.
Benveniste already had works published in one of the most popular journals of all time, Nature. But with this paper, the chief editor, John Maddox, refused to publish it. Benveniste kept calling him and was confused on why he wouldn't publish his paper when they published all of the others.
Now let's think about this for a moment. After doing our Deep State series, in which we are no way finished, we could talk about this for the next 100 episodes. But we are now looking at everything we come across to see what is connected to the Committee of 300.
Now, the journal, Nature, isn't part of the 300. However, according to John Coleman, who wrote The Conspirators' Hierarchy, the Committee of 300, and Fritz Springmeier, who wrote The Bloodlines of the Illuminati, the Royal Society is connected. It had members such as Charles Darwin, his cousin Francis Galton, Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin, along with Norman Lockyer, who was also the founder of Nature Journal.
Right. So the Royal Society's website states that its roles are promoting science and its benefits, recognizing excellence in science, supporting outstanding science, providing scientific advice for policy, fostering international and global cooperation.
Global cooperation. Yeah, that doesn't bring up a red flag. Also, just to let you know, Darwin's cousin Francis Galton coined the term eugenics based on Darwin's theory of evolution, which is what our entire Deep State series is about. So global cooperation for sure sets off an alarm for us.
Also, if you didn't know, Darwin influenced Marx's work after reading his theory on evolution. Marx said, quote, "Darwin's work is most important and suits my purpose in that it provides a basis in natural science for the historical class struggle," end quote. So on this, you can say Darwin influenced communism.
Also, this even goes deeper into Satanism because Fritz states in his book Bloodlines of the Illuminati about Darwin, quote, "The theory of evolution is important because it allows people, including the victim, to not take moral responsibility for their actions, and it is also the basis of some of the Hinduism and witchcraft teachings that will be given the deeper altars. This is a backdoor approach to destroy godliness that is carried out on children in general." What?
Yeah. Okay, this is seriously a whole episode on its own. What Darwinism is, and if it has roots in Satanism, and why this theory has been published by science and academic leaders, etc., etc.
But would y'all like us to do this? You want to know about evolution? It can be a dicey subject, but we'll get into Darwin if y'all want. Let us know.
For sure. It's kind of why we stayed away from it for a while. It is. But okay. Let's digress and go back to our original story here. We need to explain this to show that there is a potential motive on why they don't want to publish Benveniste's paper. So if they are the cabal here, then this makes perfect sense.
Benveniste's work was challenging the entire plan of pyramid structure. Imagine you can be healed of an illness without even taking medicine. Yet these Illuminati wouldn't stand for it.
Finally, the editor of Nature at the time, John Maddox, finally agreed to publish it. But it came with heavy warnings that when something like, if Benveniste was right in his finding, almost all of the scientific understanding we have today would be trashed. So therefore, it is highly unlikely his findings are true.
Ben, this smells like Problematica to me. You remember that?
Yes, Problematica.
So if you guys haven't watched our Ancient Artifacts episode, we highly encourage you to do so. So Maddox, to get back to this, Maddox himself, along with one other so-called scientist and a magician, why your guess is as good as ours, also wanted to oversee his experiment. So according to the documentary Water Memory by Wonderful Content in Motion, Benveniste had a journalist from a French publication who had a medical background pretend to be an assistant who he dressed up in a lab coat to oversee the whole thing and record it.
Benveniste agreed to it with no issues at all. He didn't know this scientist, and in his own words, he soon realized that these guys were fraudbusters and may not actually be scientists. The magician distracted people while the other two messed up the experiment. Maddox even stated in an interview in the 80s that they believed Benveniste, but thought someone in his lab was playing a joke, which ended up being their final explanation of how this worked.
So at first everything worked out and the experiments tested positive. Then according to Jacques Testart, another biologist who followed his work, the three started to put in place certain procedures out of the ordinary just to show he was wrong, and which made the test for the memory of water fail. The team from Nature flew back to London, and that is when they published the article discrediting